What's up, everyone? I hope everyone's doing well out there. Today we have a question from NothingHere who asks, could you talk about how dispute resolution works on Darknet markets? For example, how do mods establish what happened in a transaction without breaking anonymity? Or is it just one person's word against another's? So it's funny. This question was asked now because I went into pretty vivid detail regarding this topic in the last video that I published on this channel. I will try to answer this question and talk about stuff not mentioned explicitly in the last video to answer your question in more detail. How it works is that the buyer is the only one who can dispute in an order. This is because at the end of the day, the vendor isn't having anything sent to him, so he can't dispute anything. When the buyer elects to use the dispute system, most of the time this is done just by clicking, on the word or the button on the Darknet market that says dispute on their order page or whatever. Typically this is found, on the order number or the page that shares the details about the order. Many Darknet markets, like Dream, when they existed, would basically do nothing for you. Maybe people out there who had a different experience with this, but that was what I found to be true in my experience. Suppose the site takes disputes seriously, which is always a good, for business. Once you dispute the order, you will have a staff member who is assigned that dispute, or will be available from a collection of currently active disputes that staff will have access to. You'll state your case, specifically why you're making the dispute, why you feel entitled to a refund, or why you need market staff to intervene, in the first place. Typically at this point, either the vendor will comment and clarify the situation or disagree with what's been stated, or they won't. Suppose they don't say anything though, for a prolonged period of time. In that case, staff will most likely request that the vendor make some statement or say something in response to what the customer had said. I know, I used to tell the vendor that, they have 7 days to respond, and if they don't respond, I would find the customer at that point would get a 100% refund. If the vendor did respond, his response would be considered for the adjudication process. If the customer's statements considered the vendor's terms and conditions, they would be valid. If the vendor's terms and conditions stated that no refunds were given and there were no guarantees for shipping, that would be investigated. We will look at the vendor to see if they have changed their terms and conditions to be, able to win or avoid a dispute. Most of the time, only one party is at fault. This is either the customer or the Darknet vendor. However, there are times when the parties agree to split responsibility, an example would be an individual with a package sent to an individual with a fake name. At the end of the day, no vendor can be held responsible for delivery to an address with a fake name. Using a fake name is a bad move regarding, opsec for the buyer. If an individual claims they didn't receive the package because they used a fake name, it would be their fault and, they don't get a refund, the vendor may still agree to give them a partial refund though. I've seen this. This is done for a variety of reasons. Sometimes the vendor agrees to do this to ensure that the buyer is happy. If the buyer stays happy, the buyer may agree to leave the vendor a good review, because the vendor went out of, his way to compromise with the buyer, even though they didn't have to. The reverse can also be true though. So a Darknet buyer can agree to modify their agreement with the Darknet vendor if the Darknet vendor, is at fault, for example. So every case is unique and different. That said, the outcome of each case depends primarily on the individuals who are involved. in addition to like what actually transpired to cause the dispute to begin with. Obviously if someone like, launches a dispute because they ordered a package and they didn't receive it the next day, then, that dispute would be like, it would just be closed. As it's like, it's ridiculous to even open in the first place. So in that case, I most likely would disallow the refund for that particular transaction. In this case, if a vendor like hadn't shipped the item already, and they, saw that an individual brought up a dispute against them the next day, they decide whether they wanted to ship anything out because, they had already won the dispute for that specific transaction. Like, they by all means absolutely could do this. Typically darknet vendors avoid this because like darknet vendors typically live on reputation. Like what I mean by this is that they end up having the ability to earn money based solely on how well their reputation is, jeopardizing, their entire business if they screw that up. So it's not something that you see often. Like once a verdict is made in favor of either side, then the individual doing the dispute resolution process for that darknet market will then finalize this by using an interface that the website is, set up expressly for dispute resolution. So I hope this answers your question, and I appreciate you taking the time to ask it. If you've not already, hit that like button to support this content. It really helps out, and make sure that you subscribe if you haven't yet. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.